And joining me now from this organization called Our Republican Legacy is Barbara Comstock, former Republican member of Congress from suburban Virginia. She had the 10th congressional district. It's for those of you that care about Washington, D.C. area geography, it was McLean, and it actually reached into the Shenandoah Valley. It was always traditionally more Republican, and over time had, like many of the suburban Republican seats of the late 90s, early aughts, have now trended towards blue. Barbara Comstock, good to talk to you. Good to see you.
Great to be with you.
So Our Republican Legacy, I mean, look, I've been having a lot of these conversations, frankly, about both parties, right? And there's definitely this feeling that both parties are, as I've said, they're both kind of dead carcasses that allowed other entities to reanimate them as like zombie versions of themselves. So I've had this conversation about the zombie donkeys, you know. Now we're talking about, I guess, the zombie elephant here that Donald Trump reanimated. What I'm finding curious here, because there's a lot of what I would call recovering Republicans that have decided, well, maybe I got to go independent, right? Or maybe I got to try a third party. This seems to be a last gasp attempt at trying to reform the Republican Party from within. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yes, and it's a group of people who are still Republicans. It's not people, for the most part, who are ever going to run for office again. So it's more sort of a team of coaches and people who've been out there speaking out. Many of us, like myself, Charlie Dent, Senator Danforth, have supported people other than Donald Trump or Republicans these days, because they don't represent our free market, free enterprise principles, sort of supporting our allies abroad, sort of the Reagan principles, also the rule of law, the Constitution. We have a president who, when he's asked, do you support, the Constitution? It's like, I don't know.
Right.
This is a problem for those of us who, grew up, I grew up, with the Federalist Society, respecting the rule of law. I'm part of a group also called the Rule of Law Society, where we do think those things are very important. I worked on the confirmation of, Chief Justice John Roberts. So, when I was at the Justice Department under John Ashcroft. So, I
Right.
work with people like Ted Olson. So these kind of things are important to me, important to a lot of the people part of this group. But we'd like to find sort of a new generation of leaders, because, a lot of people, particularly a lot of young women, often ask me, what do I do now? It's such a mess out there. And a lot of it is you can, grassroots, you can run in the states often because it's less polarized, not as much infected by Trumpism sometimes at the state level. And you can really be more yourself in your own brand and get back to a lot of these principles when you do run on the state level. And I think that's where Republicans might have a shot of getting back to some of that.
I hear you, except it's amazing how many local elections. I spent a lot of time in the panhandle of Florida, and Pensacola in particular. So I'm very familiar with the local politics there. And what you describe is mostly true. Like, for instance, they just had a big fight in Pensacola, and there was sort of the MAGA wing of the party was trying to take control of the local university's board, and the local leaders fought back, and they're all Republicans, right? And it's, this isn't, it's just a different sort of brand of Republicanism, really more like what you're describing. And they had some success, but in the elections, you just play the MAGA label, you play the Trump label, and those folks can't win primaries, even on the local level. I mean, it does feel as if what you're describing, I would have agreed with more 5 years ago than I think today.
No, it definitely is. You have to work a lot harder. You have to find like a money base and find, a lot of support, find the right districts, where you can do that. And then if, I think particularly in these swing districts, if they aren't going to play and be helpful, I think that's where Republicans like myself, it's like, we're going to withhold our votes from Republicans who aren't respecting those principles. I did endorse in my old district, the Democrat last time, because, I was seeing Republicans who were not supporting the rule of, they just fall in line and support things that I know. I mean, they literally say to me, I agree with you. I know that's not true, but I
know
have
these
to say the
conversations.
election was rigged. I basically have to lie to my voters because if I don't, I won't get the nomination. And I think when you treat voters like idiots and when you lie to them all the time, then it's your fault, not their fault. I mean, it's become, and people say, oh, but you don't understand. They all believe this. And I said, well, they all believe it because it's not just Donald Trump lying to them.
Mhm.
It's everybody else lying to them. And, usually, I mean, when, in Virginia, when you have candidates who win or lose elections in Virginia, um, you know, they concede elections. The Republicans who lost for Senate or Congress in 2022, they lost, they conceded elections. They didn't go out and say it's rigged, it's rigged. Our party people came together and said the elections were fair. But then when Trump's on the ballot, everything's rigged if he doesn't win. So it is silly and it's difficult. I mean, a lot of times I just tell people, hey, maybe you want to sit it out until he's gone. But I do think it's important that for people who want to be active, maybe you get active on that lowest level and build a record of working to fix things, with your schools or with your, at a delegate or state rep level, because at those levels, things are a little less partisan and you have to work harder, but you might be able to break through.
It's interesting. Here's something that isn't clear to me in how our Republican legacy has laid things out, which is this mostly a issue of character, or is this mostly an issue of ideology? Do you see where I'm going here? Because you make an ideological case, and it's like I don't know what I think the bigger issue is character, but I'm not a member of the Republican Party. Where are you on that?
Oh, I definitely think it's of character. Look, I mean, we are here, on June 6th on D-Day. And you look at Donald Trump yesterday when he's saying,
who thought somehow the Germany chancellor would be upset. Oh, let's not bring up D-Day.
Yeah. Like,
what?
Oh, that's a bad day for you. It's like, I know you don't. Well,
I have to tell you, though, that is a reminder of how Trump thinks. This is the problem with Trump's style of thinking. Everything is a win or a loss, period.
Well, he also doesn't have any understanding of history, in general.
There's that too.
And, I think it was, he was sitting in, Palace of Versailles one time and just saying, hey, this is a cool place. Did anything happen here? So, just his ignorance is always monumental and embarrassment on the world stage.
But the reason I ask about character versus ideology is because, I'm watching John Cornyn out down in Texas, and he said, this is going to be a test of whether character still matters. And I was just like, poor John.
It won't. No, I mean,
no, right. He's going to run a character race and he's going to lose that primary.
Yeah, I think he will. And I think this is when the people who have capitulated to Trump all find out it doesn't, you've capitulated your character. And so you've already given that up. And so you look time after time, what do you get for it? It doesn't matter. And so that's the problem. They have given up on that. So, it's going to take people standing up to him. And, they haven't, they've signed up and they've given it over to him. But the good news is he's never won a majority of the people. It's still, even in the swing states, was narrow, as Elon Musk pointed out. You couldn't have won without my money, because Trump doesn't like to use his money and all this money that he's amassing. I don't think you're going to see him doling it out next year. I think he is really going to keep that for himself and for whatever future things he wants to do, because when he was amassing it over the past 4 years, he didn't use it in 2022. So I think he ran for office so he wouldn't end up in jail and so that he could amass a lot of money, the meme coins, all these I mean, look, he's doing this hey, everybody else has to bring their business back here, but I'm building
Right.
hotels all over the world. So he can do business overseas, but you can't. So I think there has to be, people of character who stand up and say, there is a different way.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you a different way. They can do it in a state. They can, I mean, look,
But
we
is
have
I guess the
people.
question is, do you do it inside the party or outside the party? For
Well,
instance,
I think you can
Lisa
try.
Murkowski, I think
Yeah,
Lisa Murkowski has, to me, shown the way to do it,
yeah.
which is
I
she
don't have. I mean,
stakes,
we're
right?
doing
And
it here with this group. I think people can try different things. I mean, I would
okay,
vote for if I had somebody who's an independent in my state who did it. Listen, I'm going to vote for Abigail Spanberger this year in Virginia. So I'm not.
right.
We don't have a Republican who's doing something where they're standing up and showing
Is there
character.
anything she could do, the Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, to say to you that would convince you, no, she's not going to go down the Trump road?
Oh, no, because she's already, first she said she wasn't going to, and then she has gotten all in line.
Mhm.
She is,
Well, she wants
not
the
stood up
nomination. She didn't want
for,
to have. She didn't want to lose the nomination.
yeah, no, and it all came down to they all capitulate to Trump, and they're not their own person. And when you're not authentic, and when you just become a MAGA mouthpiece, because that's what you think your base is the only way you
Hmm.
can do this, then you aren't of much use to the body politic at large. And you're seeing they don't get anything done because of that. And you're not effective. And look, in Virginia, we are getting, we got the Trump Musk, chainsaw massacre to our, not just to our federal employees, to our contractors. And now you saw in the Washington Post today, they had this whole story of, oh, whoops, we fired too many employees. We need you to come back. And they're like, we aren't able to do a lot of these things that government actually needs to do, like the weather,
Mhm.
and hurricanes are coming, and NIH and disease and all these things. And they're like, why would I want to go back? You treat everyone horribly, and it's going to be a problem. But so no, but I do think it's a question of character, and I think that's why we just need a few examples. We just need to find a few examples of character, and that's what we're trying to do, and
So,
find
do
them
you
wherever
think
we
that?
can.
Do you think? Let me now ask the question from another perspective. That is Trump's sort of quasi, and I hesitate to say he's got an ideology, right? We kind of know he
No, he
doesn't.
doesn't. There's no
But there
idea.
is an ideology that is developed sort of around him, right? It's isolationism. It's a little bit of there's pieces of it, right? So there's certainly echoes of the 1920s and 30s Republican
Yes.
Party,
Yeah.
right? When it comes to immigration, when it comes to trade, and a few of these things. And I guess the question I have is, do you think the rejection of sort of your wing of the party by these voters was despite character? Like, yeah, we think Mitt Romney's a man of high character, but we just don't agree with these policies, and we'd rather have a rogue sort of smash things up, and let's start over. And I say this because I watch the Democratic Party. They're trying to figure this out, right? They're reactionaries of a reactionary, right? The Republican Party is a reactionary party right now. It's simply more about what they're organizing. The Trump organizing principle is in rejection of, rather than in sort of putting out there. Is would you be in favor of recruiting people of high character that shared his isolationist views, for instance?
Well, no. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to get into unnecessary wars. I mean, as
Mhm.
Ronald Reagan said, the more we have a stronger military and do more of these things, the more peaceful we are going to be. I mean, we need,
Mhm.
in the world we have today, we need to have these strong alliances, and trade is part of those strong alliances. I'm also president of the former members of Congress, and as we go around the world, and when you
Mhm.
have these strong trade alliances, with our allies, that makes them more prosperous, makes us more prosperous, and makes for a more peaceful world. As we're exiting these countries and not having trade, we are letting bad actors, whether it's China or Russia, enter
Mhm.
that space and make things more volatile and more dangerous. So that's the danger that Trump is creating, because he doesn't have a real, a bigger geopolitical understanding of the world, and doesn't understand, World War I or World War II, what people fought for, and how people fought for that peace. But I think we also need to, as Republicans, and this is where I think state government is very effective, find a way to make things work. That whole abundance agenda that, is become, people are talking about, how can we cut government down to the size where it works, is more effective. People want to see government working at the state and local level.
Well, see, this to me is the real divide, right?
Yes.
Which is, and I do think that's a real divide, which is, do you want government to work or not? And there are people in this version of the Republican Party is like, no, 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 I don't care if it doesn't work. In fact, the more it doesn't work, the easier it will be for us to be able to convince the public to get rid of it.
Well, and that's where, I mean, when they came in this whole chainsaw massacre, the first thing they did was fire the inspectors general, who are the people who knew where to cut things smartly. And so because they had no understanding of government, they didn't go in and say, sure, these guys were waiting, that we have our list. We know where the waste is. We'll help you. We'll cut things, make things work better, send some of the things back to the states. Those things are always more different. You have to understand government to be able to go in and cut it, and then find things that you don't want to do, instead of just this, heritage version of just starve everything and throw it down. I mean, you're seeing this now with the weathermen saying, well, if you don't have all those satellite balloons up, I can't tell you the weather. Oh, we didn't think about that. Then they run back out and say, come back, we want you to work. They just don't even, you sit down and you understand, what do we need to get the basics done? So that's where I think Republicans can do some smart work on the state level, on the federal level. And the problem is, what Trump has made the bottom line of doing work for is, are you loyal to me? So he puts a 22-year-old kid in charge of counterterrorism at Homeland, who knows nothing about counterterrorism. That is frightening. They are emptying out counterterrorism at the FBI. Listen, Kristi Noem was on the Ways and Means Committee and knows nothing about Homeland. So it's very frightening to me that she's doing her little cosplay, and even, Megyn Kelly's making fun of her.
You served with her, and I know others that have served with her and are just shocked at her turn.
And you know what every member says whenever they talk to each other? What has happened to Kristi Noem?
Yeah,
People
I've heard this.
who were much better friends with her than I say, what has happened to her?
I mean, she was part of the South Dakota Republican legacy of your Mike Rounds, your John Thune, and sort of one in that same, these are, I mean, if you think about it, Thune and Rounds are frankly, my guess is who you would be holding up as sort of, this is who the party should be, when it's,
plenty of her colleagues still in office roll their eyes at her, because the White House makes fun of, reported. I mean, that's been reported.
Yeah, they do.
Roll their eyes and do not understand why she's running around with Corey Lewandowski doing all.
Well, we know why. She's got some vision of running for president from Homeland Security. Good luck with that.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. So, but we need smart people in there. We need qualified. And this is the most incompetent administration, because merit has nothing to do with why people are in there. So Republicans should be talking about merit, should be talking about qualified people, and then should be talking about right-sizing government, giving things. I mean, when I was a state legislator, we went in there, and Bob McDonnell was my first governor, and he was great on cutting things down to size. And what he did was say, he didn't come in with an axe. He went to the agencies and said, I'm going to give you incentives to cut your departments down. He didn't terrorize the departments. He said, as people leave, we're not going to replace people. So we're going to do attrition, but we also want to give you incentives, people in there, for finding where we can cut, and then giving you bonuses for finding those cuts, and how we can make this all work and do more with less. So we weren't terrorizing the people who were already there, and giving bonuses for people for making things work.
you're
That
making a
was,
case. You're
yeah.
making a case for something that I thought that you could that I'm waiting for some smart Republican to do with Trump, which is say, hey, Trump has good ideas. He's a moron and trying to actually look. Doge, in theory, if you is a good, it can be a
Well,
good idea if you execute
Doge
it.
was just
Pot,
was a
right,
tagline. It was, they
of
had no
course.
theory, they had no plan. It
None.
was just,
But
it was a
there was a way to, if
chainsaw.
you really wanted to do this, there was a way you could have worked with Congress. Congress would have given real authority. Democrats would have. There are plenty of Democrats who would have done it, gotten involved in this, especially right after that election, because there was a whole bunch of Democrats wanting to show that hey, we're not, just tagged in with the big government wing of the party, right? And they chose. So there is an incompetency to him just on execution. Like you can say, well,
They're not good at it
right.
because
They're just not good at this.
yeah, they have such contempt for the government that they don't come in and do it. And now you're going to have this backlash where you don't want to have as a Republican who wants to right size things, you don't want to have the backlash to say, oh, we can't
don't touch it again. Right.
And they're doing the
right?
same thing with cutting Medicaid and pretending that you can cut it and it won't hurt anybody, and saying, we're just going to make people, if you go back to work, you're going to have health care. Well, no, you're not going to necessarily have health care if you go back to work, because not all employers provide health care. So if you go back to work and your employer doesn't provide health care, what are we going to do if we want to give work incentives and now your employer doesn't provide it? What are we going to do as the government? Because we want you to work, yay, now you're employed. But we have Obamacare, which Republicans didn't get rid of. So since we didn't get rid of it, and lots of Republican states expanded Medicaid, we now have to come up with something smart that gives those people health care and not lie and pretend that they're going to have health care when something like 40% of
well, and by the way, the
business
system
or other businesses don't provide health care.
The system, this was an intentional outcome, the system was designed with the idea that, hey, more businesses aren't going to be providing healthcare. And since they're not, you've got to provide more options for people to get healthcare on their own. And this is the system.
Yeah. I mean, last night I saw, Scott Jennings, who likes to, with his new little shtick, is to do the sneering and attack everybody because this is his, he's now MAGA and pretending to be MAGA and saying, oh, you want to give health care to illegals? Well, guess what? That's the law. That's a Supreme Court decision. If somebody walks into your emergency room and is dying, the doctor doesn't get to say, oh, who's
Show me your papers.
bleeding shotgun person?
Show me your papers before I decide. Yeah.
They have to operate on you. This has been, going on forever.
But Barbara, forget whether it's the law or not. It's called human
compassion.
And compassion,
if you're a Christian, Jesus said, you take care of the Samaritan too,
right?
Not just your neighbor. So all these Christians who now want to kick the Samaritan to the curb, Republican Jesus apparently, is going to cut out the Samaritan. So, there's a lot of, revisionist history with MAGA Jesus here and MAGA Republicans that does not at all go along with what they've been doing just 5-10 years ago and what the states have been doing, because so many of these states, like Indiana, Mike Pence signed, Medicaid into law. Most of the states have. So you have to, as Congress, not lie to them and say, oh, you're going to get it when you get kicked off. And if, or your kids aren't going to, they're all going to end up in your hospitals. And when you cut all this off and the hospitals close, well, the hospitals and the rural hospitals, when they close, it's not just going to close for the people on Medicaid. They're going to close for your farmers and all your people, whether they're wealthy or poor, they're going to close. So what do you do when those hospitals close? Because they're depending on that Medicaid money too. Nobody understands that. And some of the biggest Medicaid populations are in the districts of the Speaker, Steve Scalise, because Louisiana.
Well, you know who gets this? Josh Hawley gets this. He
Yeah,
knows who his constituents are. He knows
yeah.
who the new Republican base is in Missouri. And a lot of people. And Medicaid isn't, you and I grew up at a time when Medicaid was considered a piece of welfare and it had that sort of, but that is not the brand of Medicaid in the
No,
21st
because we
century.
expanded. I mean,
Correct. Medicaid is
Republic, yeah,
now catastrophic health care if you don't get insurance either through your work or some other way, but it is America's catastrophic healthcare policy. And guess what? It keeps a lot of people out of poverty. It
and it's
really
also
does.
it's nursing homes, and so
Oh,
whether we
there'd
like
be no nursing homes without Medicaid, would there?
no, and people don't, and if you, I wish the press would do this, go through all those Republicans and ask them how many have grandma in a nursing home, and how many of you are paying full freight, and how many have Nana or
My
grandma.
grandmother, God bless her, she's 98. She ran out of money, and yeah, it's Medicaid. And if it weren't Medicaid, there'd be, there'd be a lot of people in my family struggling to figure out. Not everybody could figure out how it was going to happen, or who does she live with, or can you get the home health care this way? Can you do this? I mean, the amount of money, and we can talk about how nursing homes charge because they kind of know that the government's going to pay for it. So it might be that it's not the freest market, when it works, but Medicaid is a lifeline to a lot of people who have kids in college and aging parents.
Yeah, no, and people are living longer, so we know that, and so there needs, and those discussions just haven't been had. They've just gone
Right.
in with the chainsaw. So these are discussions that obviously
Mm-hmm.
have not been had when the chainsaw went out there, and the Democrats haven't necessarily had them in constructive ways. Republicans haven't,
Mm-hmm.
but I think these were the kind we used to have as Republicans, and
Mm-hmm.
these were difficult discussions. And this is
When
not what because Trump doesn't understand this. He doesn't care about these kind of things,
right,
and it's all sound bites. And now you have a party that isn't even governing. This whole Doge operation went
right,
on with one man who had no understanding of government, Elon Musk, going in with these kids, and then Congress just relinquishing its responsibility, on the law. Now, fortunately, the one place, because I've been involved in with different groups that have done all these lawsuits, and that's where a lot of these things have been stopped. So thank goodness, and I say thank goodness, the law is held up, and a lot of the lawyers, and this is where
right.
Republicans got attacked for a lot of these conservative lawyers that got put on the bench. And in many cases, it's these Reagan, Bush, and Trump lawyers who are stopping the Trump agenda. God
Well,
bless
the
them.
fact that Trump is now turning on Leonard Leo, who of course is a polarizing figure on the left, it tells you, again, Trump does not believe in any ideology. He believes if I appointed you, look at his complaint about Amy Coney Barrett. His complaint isn't that she's been a proper conservative. His complaint is she doesn't rule in favor of me enough.
Yeah, well, and he doesn't. Well, I mean, look, when you've got, going back to Kristi Noem saying, habeas corpus means the president can take somebody out of the country if he wants to. Beware, Elon Musk. She might be.
Well,
She
that is
might
the
be
Steve
not.
Bannon plan for Musk, right? Which is,
Yeah, yes, exactly. So this is all basic things, and I think people like our Republican legacy, they're listen, it's a group, we know it's not realistic. I mean, it's
you seem more
well,
skeptical. It's interesting because I'm sitting here going, I'm skeptical. And you're like, yeah, me too. Like you
yeah,
don't
no, but
seem
it's
convinced that
you
you'll
have
be
to.
able to reform the party from within right
No, but
away.
I think it takes one person to go out and be an object lesson and succeed. So it takes one person of character to be able to go out there and then put these principles into action in a state. So many of them have capitulated. Listen, people thought,
Well, I would argue Spencer Cox has done this. I mean, Spencer Cox, to me, would
and
be the
then he
poster
felt when he
child.
had to capitulate to
Yeah,
Trump, then they go to Trump, So this
yeah,
DeSantis did the same thing. So now that Trump is going to, well, he can't run again. Hopefully he just wants to get his millions and billions and go away. But the others don't have the same power that he does. And while they're all going to be, I think he's setting up a fight between Rubio and Vance and maybe Trump Jr. And while they're all going to fight, and maybe
right.
Elon will join in and fight, was interesting, I think.
Don't forget Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, Tucker. Well, and did you realize Tucker Carlson and Mike Levin are in a little Mean Girls spat too? Yeah, they're
All
going
over
at each
Israel.
other.
Yeah.
So
No, it does feel as if
these
eating
guys
their
are
own
going to
is
go
coming.
into fights. So there's going to be a lot of, the fight club is going to start because they may be afraid of fighting Trump.
So is this where you see opportunity for the sane wing?
And that's where, particularly in the States, somebody sane can come up and, do that. I mean, look, you have somebody like Andy Beshear. I mean, he's a Democrat, but where's the Republican Andy Beshear? Who, I mean, look, he's run twice and in Kentucky. He's his own brand. He's his own man. Where's that Republican who can do that?
Well, there's the Vermont governor who somehow survives under the radar.
Well, you need a bigger state. You
I
need something. You need a Republican in a Midwest state, in a swing state. You need to have a Republican who will do this in a swing state, in a big enough state to get noticed, and then get out there with some of these problem solving.
Well, isn't the problem though the primary electorate?
Of Shapiro, he's like, make stuff work, right? When you fix I-95 when it collapses in 30 days, people notice. When you go in and kind of broker deals between Democrats and Republicans, when you attract business from new places and just get stuff done and just don't pay attention to Washington, I think a governor like that, who then just goes to business and says, come on in and work with me and do things. I think that type of person, people are dying for that. And just, that's where a Republican who, and then go overseas and start saying, hey, I want to work with you. I want you to come in. Let's have some sister city things going on. That person could, really start a whole new thing. And it just takes one or two of those.
Before we got started, you were saying you had just returned from London, and the UK fascinates me right now because essentially the Tories are collapsing, and the right is essentially being replaced by Nigel Farage and a new right wing.
And that's why they're collapsing, because it's a dying. And I think Trump, it's the same way. It's the last gasp of. So
how do you? I mean, are in some ways though, is our Republican legacy the Tories? I
think Trump. I think the reason the Republic, they've kind of collapsed is because they got taken over by sort of the Trump. The Brexit stuff and all the crazy stuff and isolating.
But their voters left the Tories. Their voters are now with the Brexiteers, right?
Yeah, and so that I think that all hurt them. And then they had, they went with all the crazy people. And then they had corruption, and so they're having to totally rebuild. And Nigel Farage is not going to be the way to rebuild. He can't lead, a 2-car parade. So that's not going to be their answer. They need to do what we need to do. They've got to totally rebuild. He's not the answer. So they have the same problem we have. So I do think, but the one good thing when you look at the EU and Europe, they've come together because of the weakening of the U.S. So I think there's
it was out of necessity.
And look, listen, I think the best leader out there on the world front is Zelenskyy. God bless, and look what he did on Sunday and how they and my friend Denver Riggleman was over there over the weekend when all of that was going down. And so, these people are the scrappiest and care about freedom, and they are not giving their freedom up. And when you have freedom fighters who are fighting on the right side of things for the right reasons and for their cause, they are getting the EU and and the UK behind them. And that's yesterday.
Well, this is the folly of Putin. Even if Putin thinks he gets a win out of this, there's going to be a Ukrainian insurgency that probably eventually topples Putin when somebody's fighting for their land, they never stop. Ask America and the North Vietnamese. When you're fighting for your land. Yeah.
Yeah, and the speaker and Lindsey Graham, they have the the sanctions bill. Trump says, no, they're not going to do anything I don't like. They've got a, veto-proof majority in the Senate for that sanctions bill. The House, maybe it's going to be hard, but, they can get that. They should push that bill now after that great victory. And I hope they do, but that's where we need to see a little courage on that front too, because, they should appeal to.
Well, it's amazing
Trump.
how some of
They
the
should
leading
appeal to Trump's
voices.
vanity that you like a winner. Why don't you
Right.
go with a winner here?
Well, but what's amazing is that the Tucker Carlson wing of this MAGA movement has somehow convinced Trump that Ukraine is going to cause Putin to use use nuclear weapons. I mean, the fact that Tucker Carlson is able to saber rattle on behalf of Putin, I just can't believe an American journalist is saber rattling on behalf of Putin.
Well, listen,
it's astonishing.
Mark Levin has woken up to that one and is, writing him off as a kook. And Mark still has some sway with Trump, so he's gone after him full throttle now on Iran.
We'll see. I feel like it's amazing how often you think Tucker's been marginalized and he somehow creeps back into.
I think a party that goes with a crackpot like Tucker will really die out, because it just, like I said, let's take a few. So
realistically, then, it sounds like what this group hopes for is that there is a movement, and that there's some candidates that run on this agenda in a primary in 28, and that Republican primary voters might find it appealing. That's where I'm struggling. That's where I'm skeptical.
Well, no, it's also, you're trying to find candidates on the state and local level in governors. It's not just as a presidential candidate, but at all levels, doing that hard work to find people that want to get out there. I mean, you don't know how the circumstances are going to change and where.
But somebody's got to be able to win almost against Trump for people to believe that there's enough of a movement inside the Republican tent, right? Like somebody's got to almost win despite the best efforts of Trump to stop them.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm in the position of whatever stops Trump, whether it's a Democrat, an independent, or somebody from within the party. But we've got to start now to some way to rebuild this party at every level. So rebuilding the party means having a structure, having people who are saying, who are speaking out and saying, you can have these principles. We need people of character, step out, giving a permission structure that you can say these things and still survive and hopefully, stand up and do this, give them that, the hope that you can be a person of character and run again. And, you have somebody like Senator Danforth, who, certainly had a long and distinguished career. Don't be afraid to speak out. So many people, the worst thing right now is the silence. So many people who say, oh, yeah, it's great that you're saying something, but I'm working behind the scenes. I've got to.
Or how about if I leave, then somebody worse will replace me.
Well,
right?
That is true. And I do have sympathy for people who are in there knowing that is true. But there's so many of those, particularly those who are in the Senate, who have a 6-year window. I'll give you credit. The other day, Senator Kennedy, of all people, because a lot of times he's just saying, just does his folksy stuff. But he went at Howard Lutnick on his insanity on tariffs and just called him out on not knowing what he was talking about.
Boy, Lutnick he's been between what Kennedy did to him. So you're saying if a country came in with an offer of reciprocal, zero tariffs, you're just, and there was crickets. And then what was it? Lutnick was in the House and Madeline Dean hit him with the bananas. Well, we got to manufacture bananas here. Yeah. Where are we planting our banana trees here, Howard?
The patience of a saint not to throw the banana at him. I mean, it was, and then the same thing on education when, one of the members was asking, Secretary
McMahon.
WWE there.
Would
it be DEI if we, talked about the Oklahoma race riots? And it was clear that she didn't know what the Oklahoma race riots
were. Yeah.
And again, she had the patience not to say, wait a minute, do you know about the Oklahoma race riots? Do you know? And she said, well, I'll have to get back to you on that one. It's like, no, you don't have to get back to me. Those can be taught. And then she said, well, do you know, what about Ruby Bridges? Can we teach Ruby Bridges? And again, she's saying, I'll have to get back to you. She didn't know who Ruby Bridges was. And this, as I said, totally incompetent, non-merit-based people in these positions, which is the worst thing we have. And as Republicans, we should be ashamed of that.
No, I mean, you know, I always say I grew up in a mixed political marriage. But my father was always one of those who said, well, Democrats have some interesting ideas, but I want Republicans to implement them. They're better managers. You can't say that today. The Republicans are not the better managers.
So I became a Republican when I started. I mean, I grew up in a Democratic family, and I remember reading like National Review and, oh, so intellectual. I remember meeting Bill Buckley and be so.
There's a whole Bill Buckley would not be allowed into this party.
And, you know, this week, Vance was being interviewed by somebody and they said, oh, you used to write for, you're kind of an intellectual. You used to write for National Review. And he said, oh, you're such an a-hole for reminding me of that. And I thought, who's the you-know-what for saying that? You know, I'm thinking, oh, Bill Buckley could hear that we have, I mean, you know, the future of the Republican Party cannot be this horrible JD Vance.
I don't know what to make of it.
To the Vatican and is slapping two popes on the shoulder like, attaboy,
like they're pals.
You don't slap the Pope on the shoulder when you meet him, particularly a very elderly, sick Pope. But this is what this nitwit who can't ever button his jacket.
So what do you make? You know, it's funny. Is Vance? Do we think Vance has always been a charlatan?
I never saw that.
Right. You know. Do we think he's always been a charlatan, or do we think he's just? I've always thought he's just immature still, and he's still trying to figure out who he is.
Both. I think he's always been a charlatan, and he is not. I think maybe the wife is the brains in the family, and maybe was carrying him along. But I think he's always been a charlatan, and he is not as. People have said he's smart, but he says a lot of dumb things. You know, the things he said about the space program this week. He's just not as smart as he thinks he is. And he is a totally charmless person. Having met both him and Bill Buckley.
He was not going to win that primary. I mean, it was because he was not very charismatic at all.
Yeah.
And, you know, he just got willed to it by the last minute endorsement of Trump.
Yeah. And right after he won that primary, because I still was going to Republican events at that time. Remember, he came to a Republican event out in Middleburg where all the Republican folks were there. And he spent the event complaining that Karl Rove didn't want him to be the nominee. And all these people didn't want him to be the nominee. But now I'm the nominee. It's like, yeah, okay, you got Peter Thiel to buy you the nomination, and you got Junior to, you know, so you bought your nomination. Like, he is such a, he didn't earn anything he got. You know, that's what's so ridiculous. He didn't earn it. He's a mimbo. And so he's complaining. And then apparently that year when, you know, did you ever say thank you? You know, Mitch McConnell gives him all the money, and he never said thank you. And then he's horrible to Mitch McConnell. And then I don't even think he voted. He voted for Rick Scott, probably for majority leader.
And it wasn't exactly grateful to McConnell.
No, and so he is so graceless and just such a, charmless person. So that can't be the future of the party, because
for just the charismatic reasons,
is about,
you're not wrong.
And he didn't go back home and help his people. You know, he went off to San Francisco and was composting and doing everything there and getting rich, and only came home when he could use people to then buy his way in. And then he never passed any bills. I passed more bills than JD Vance. So,
So let me ask you this. So in 28, you know, when I'm asked who's the potential, the most likely nominees, and, you go through the MAGA world, and you identified the three potential MAGA people, right? Rubio, Vance, Jr. And then I always throw in Glenn Youngkin because he's got money. And because, he might, you think to yourself that strategically, who's somebody that could straddle the two wings of the party? Maybe he could. You obviously being a Virginian, and what you said about Spencer Cox, I'm going to guess that you wish Youngkin hadn't capitulated as much to Trump as he has on various things. But is he, let me ask you this, is he redeemable in your eyes?
I think for 28 in the Republican Party at this point, that's why I think for this group, it's longer term. And, because I think, Trump will be around anointing people, doing whatever. I think it'll either be somebody totally new who's not tainted by Trump at all, who rises from whatever, or it'll be a Democrat, who will, go after this Republican Party. So I do think it'll be one of those three, probably, most likely, unless, they totally flame out and are,
no, I mean, if you had a scenario where Democrats won the Senate and the House in 26, right?
Yeah,
where
then you
stuff was so bad, then it's a whole reckoning.
Yeah, then it can be a total flame out. Then you could have somebody be, but I think the problem is MAGA won't accept the half pretend MAGA. They don't do that.
So Youngkin's not MAGA enough. He's too MAGA for some Republicans and not MAGA enough for the others.
Yeah. I mean, listen, they wouldn't even accept DeSantis. He wasn't a MAGA. It was like too, I mean, I wasn't a DeSantis fan, but he ended up, kind of, crosshairs on, if you don't get the blessing.
Speaking of charmless, I mean, that's also something. I mean, it just
Glenn,
look, and I say this, you got to have somebody that can sell dog food. You got to hope that people want to eat it, but you also have somebody that can sell it.
Glenn is a charming, smart person, and
Glenn's at least charming.
Smart, and but the problem, and I wish Virginia had, if you have two-term governors, you can get a lot more done because it makes it very difficult with one term to really be able to. And that's the problem with Virginia governors, is you kind of get in there and you get stymied and you can't have a two-term.
Basically, it takes them a year to get to know how to do things.
Yeah.
They get a year to try to figure it out, and then you get your midterms and you're over,
Yeah, I think Trump's going to, want to anoint somebody, and he's going to anoint somebody who, begs for his pleasure. So unless they get totally wiped out, House and Senate, and then it is a free for all. Then there is some hope for somebody who's totally in a different mode. But I think it's going to have to be, I think for this group and what we're trying to do, I think it's more a longer term cycle.
All right, let me get you out of here on this. Name me, because you're a group, this group has a lot of formers. And as you noted, no currents. So give me some current Republicans who you have not given up on that you think could, if they stiffen their spine, they could be the sort of be at the tip of the spear here in this movement to reclaim the Republican Party for the Eisenhower to Romney era.
I have to be careful because I don't want them to get targeted.
I know if you say their name, it might hurt them, right?
Yeah, no.
Or Don Bacon,
because I think they're most likely. I will say people in the states who are keeping a lower profile, and probably your state reps and your state senators who are out there and deciding when will they run statewide or will they run for state senate, and then they have a longer shelf life and they can work into those. But
you say that, I'm a half Floridian, half Virginian, and Adam Putnam, who somebody you served with, I believe, for a period of time, he did it the right way, and he got MAGA'd out, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why I think I like this here for the, this is here kind of for I think really for the lower tier people. And then you got to get this top tier gone first, because this is who Trump pays attention to. He doesn't get involved. You can really, as a House candidate, he doesn't pay attention to those. I remember when, who was the kid in North Carolina in the wheelchair that lost his
Madison Crawford, I think.
When Tom Tillis went after him and replaced him, although the guy who replaced him isn't so hot, but when they did replace him, afterwards, when they said, hey, he wasn't so great, we had to get rid of him, Trump was like, oh, who was that kid? What was his name? Trump doesn't really notice the House races that much. It's really the Senate and the bigger ones. So that's why you can sort of do the House races and then the state and below. So that's where people.
But you're not naming names, so you don't have a lot of names, huh?
I honestly don't want to hurt. It would if I named them. Yeah, that would.
Okay, let me throw a scenario at
would
you
be
then.
out,
Right. Well, let me throw you a scenario. If John Curtis and Lisa Murkowski joined Angus King and
no, I do think
Mark Kelly to say, you know what, we're going to be independents. We're not going to be members of the Republican
no, I think it needs to be a new governor, like a new person who gets out there, new blood, new face, like a new Glenn Youngkin, like a new person that comes out of somewhere and just
without Trump baggage at all, and maybe without any old party baggage.
Yeah, like Trump a Glenn Youngkin in Pennsylvania that after Shapiro runs and wins a second term, some Glenn Youngkin in Pennsylvania comes out Republican with some, who's.
Well, you're describing the DLC of the Republican Party. It's almost like you're looking for your Bill Clinton. What Bill Clinton did, Bill Clinton was sort of what you're describing, right? Bill Clinton was an outsider, and then they took over the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and then because you need a person, not so much
you do need a leader.
And then and somebody, or so somebody in Pennsylvania, somebody in Michigan, or somebody just who comes in and just makes it click, because when Glenn did that, he did put together a great coalition, and he didn't run with Trump. And if Trump hadn't made the comeback, if Trump had been wiped out,
you're right. Youngkin might be the face of this new Republican Party.
That kind of profile would have been a very, could have been very successful. So I think that is a model for somebody who could do that, because.
So finding an outsider, you'd love to see, whether it's a retired military leader, a successful business person, somebody maybe who's had success outside of politics.
Because it could have been a Glenn Youngkin who was a state legislator who did that too. So it doesn't have to be somebody who necessarily comes from totally outside. It could be somebody who just makes that move and does it, and just decides to not latch themselves. But you probably need to have a little wherewithal, enough money to be independent. He raised half of the money he ran on was his own money. So
it gave him. Well, look, we know this, right? Having that,
and people, but people didn't realize he had been active and had a lot of social capital, in the business world in Virginia.
Well, particularly in Northern Virginia, which was an important place for a Republican to make inroads in.
Social, he did have a lot of social capital. He'd been active. His wife had been active. And so they had done a lot of things. He just didn't come out of nowhere and just run because he had money. He had done a lot of things and been active. And there was a real positive response. And because Trump had lost, people were willing to take a chance. And he was conservative, and he was genuinely conservative, but had some good ideas. But he wasn't far right.
It wasn't a dogma. It wasn't all dogma.
Yeah. And I think that kind of model would work for somebody else that wasn't attached to Trump. And
Barbara Comstock, you haven't given up yet under the Republican Party. That's basically the way we should interpret it. You're not ready to give up.
And I think Glenn did get independents and some Democrats because when he was running against somebody who,
was sort of polarizing and from another era. But also, we're not going to be kind to incumbents right now, whether you're a current incumbent or you formerly held office. Like, I do think that all of that is baggage, whether you're a D or an R. If you have the I or you are a former, I do think, because there's a lot of people who say, hey, the system hasn't worked for a while, so why are we going to turn back to people that have been there? They want new. I do think they want new, whether it's new left or new right. They want new.
But then you end up having a short shelf life on. You got to come in and then make things work. And that is the problem. They don't give you much time to make it work. So you have to really have a plan. And that's going to be, I think, Trump's problem is they've blown it in these first 6 months
Oh no,
making
I think this is his version of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Like, he had one job as far as the country was concerned. Get the economy back on track. And on the one thing that he was tasked with doing, everything else was gravy. One thing, and he blew it. Not only blew it, he has made it worse. And I think that's why he'll never get over 45%.
Yeah, and then look at where the markets are right now. Today we're sitting here 6 months in, and we aren't even back to where it was on Sleepy Joe January 20th. When you look at the markets, like I remember all through the fall, I'm saying, these markets, I could live with Sleepy Joe markets. They are pretty darn good.
No, it turns out that the country does just fine when sometimes our president is quiet.
And because he crashed the markets, and now they're getting back, okay, if we're lucky, we might get back to them, but the tariffs have slowed everything down to where we were supposed to have 2.5% growth, and we're not going to get the growth we were supposed to have.
Look, I'm going to ask you a simple question. Would you sell a house right now in Northern Virginia? Right?
No, I'm not planning. Right. And actually, my daughter's moving back here. They've been overseas, and she's moving in with us because of the high interest rates, because she can't buy a house right now. And so she's going to move in with us. And that's
the Trump economy. This is now Trump's economy. Yeah.
And
Barbara Comstock, it's always a pleasure talking with you. We're neighboring congressional districts in Northern Virginia, so it's always a pleasure. And my guess is we probably do shop at the same grocery stores.
But I am still optimistic about this country. Things will survive Trump because our economy, people still get out there and work hard, and our foreign policy, our allies will rally, even if the U.S. isn't doing what we're going to do. And hopefully the Senate and people will still stay with Ukraine.
I appreciate the optimism, because that's what I tried to be. Long-term optimistic.
Yes.
Not going to pretend it's not going to be short-term tumultuous, but just put your hurricane shutters on. Exactly. All right, Barbara. Thank you so much.
Thank you.